Remember what I said, kid. If you can, you need to do this all in one shot. No second chances. Burn through whatever reserves you have to, so long as you absorb the entire sphere. Taleon looked up at the orb floating in the sky, blotting out the sun and the skyline, casting a shadow on everything below. The idea of it felt daunting, like trying to swallow the sun. But Taleon steeled himself. Over the course of the training, he had gotten very used to pushing his limitations, to trying as hard as he possibly could, and then pushing past it. This was no different. Or at least that's what he thought to himself. Okay, get it all in one shot, Taleon said to himself, widening his feet, taking a strong stance as he gazed up at the sphere floating above, reaching out and curling up his sleeves. All right, you stupid sphere. It's just you and me. I'm not gonna get beat by a circle, Taleon said, looking up with a confident smile. He wants me to eat the sphere? Fine then. At that point, Taleon began to focus as hard as he could, gathering up all of the demonic energy that he could possibly muster, far more than he had ever used in any attack. But it was necessary. He knew the limitations of how much energy was required for how much he wanted to absorb, how much force he wanted to create. In order to try to absorb something that big, he was going to have to fuel it with more demonic energy than he's ever used in any single attack. As his demonic energy began to build, the silver globe rapidly picked up around him, very quickly turning into that silvery fire, bolting out and getting more and more intense. Surges of what looked like electricity began to run off of his body, arcing to the ground around him. Stones began to pick up off of the ground. A powerful wind began to circulate from his location, bits of stone beginning to tear themselves away from the earth, some breaking and shattering, as Taleon mustered all of the demonic energy he possibly could. So much that it felt like he was on fire. And he looked it. He couldn't tell, but his hair had started to glow, picking up a bright silver glow as it began to waft around, carried in the breeze that he was creating. The blue glow of his eyes intensified, becoming heavy, very directed, almost as if there was a blue fire glowing in them. He grit his teeth, looking up at the sphere in the sky. And finally, he reached it, his limit, the maximum amount of demonic energy that he could gather. Or at least that's what he believed, as the amount of demonic energy he was trying to concentrate was actually becoming painful, starting to hurt his body, throbbing pains. It felt like he would overheat from it, burn up like a piece of paper. Jolts of pain started to shock through his body. It's now or never, Taleon thought to himself, as he concentrated all of the demonic energy towards his stomach and his throat, which he had learned through practice was the focal point of where the magic seemed to get the strongest reaction. Glaring up at the sphere, finally, Taleon opened his mouth, at which point a hurricane of wind started to flow in, stronger than anything that Taleon had produced up to that point. The wind that he was already creating with his demonic energy seemed to pale in comparison. All around the clearing, the trees nearby were whipping. He was creating a funnel of air that was so powerful it felt like it would swallow up everything. Everyone in the clearing, Salis, Melody, Vera, and Rico, were all clasping onto things, the ground, trees, bracing themselves however they could, as the wind was so intense that it felt like it might draw them in as well. Meanwhile, the sphere in the sky began to break down, turning back into massive billowing amounts of white fog, thick, so much so that you couldn't see through them at all, beginning to circulate down towards Taleon, even the sphere itself lowering from its high placement in the sky, all of it being drawn directly down towards Taleon. And the closer it got, the faster the sphere itself seemed to break down, tearing away and becoming fog, all of it whirling towards that black vortex that Taleon was creating. At first a quarter of the sphere, and then half of it, then 3/4. Finally, the entire sphere was gone, swallowed up by Taleon, as the powerful wind that he was creating finally came to a close, his mouth slamming shut, his teeth clacking together so hard that it sounded like a bear trap going off, and finally a swallowing sound as Taleon finished the last of the energy, at which point a massive surge rippled out from Taleon, a single pulsation, a shockwave that seemed to flow through everything, the air, even the ground, shaking everything that it passed as it flowed outward, increasing in size. Finally, Taleon exhaled a deep breath as the energy around him finally began to subside, the wind slowing, and everything seemed to be returning to normal. Taleon looked over himself for a moment, checking his hands and legs. As far as he could tell, he seemed to be fine. He felt his stomach for a moment, and as far as he could tell with that, just like everything else, there seemed to be no issues. He didn't feel any pain or pressure. Nothing seemed to be amiss at all. "Hey, Taleon," Salis shouted from a fair distance away. "How are you feeling, kid? Give me the details." Taleon looked over to him, feeling a bit confused. I don't really feel anything," Taleon said, shouting over to Salis. "What? Nothing? Oh, that's a little weird." "So you don't feel any different at all?" Salis said as he began to approach. "No, not really," Taleon replied. "I mean, eating that much, I thought I might feel something, but no, I just feel normal." "Well, that's definitely something interesting," Salis said as he walked up to Taleon, now face to face with him, looking down at him. "Let me take a look at something," he said, placing his hand on Talion's head. After which, Salis closed his own eyes, and it seemed like he began to focus. As he did, a glowing white energy seemed to start to encompass his body. It was very fine, but decidedly powerful. "What are you doing?" Taleon shouted. "Shut up, kid, I'm trying to concentrate. It's hard to read another demon's demonic energy like this. There are others who are probably much better at it than I am, but I'm gonna have to do the best that I can. This is more difficult for me, so it would help if you just stayed quiet and let me check." Taleon wasn't really sure about it, but he begrudgingly allowed Salis to continue whatever it was he was doing. After about a minute, Salus removed his hand, at which point the white glow that had encompassed him faded away. "Damn it. Where the hell is it?" Salus said, clasping at his chin and staring down at Taleon. "What are you talking about?" Taleon asked. "Well, my energy, kid. You obviously absorb it. You can obviously store it somewhere. But, for the life of me, no matter how hard I check through your demonic energy, I don't see the slightest sign of my own in there. Your own level seems to be stably what it is. It's right about where it should be for the amount that you have expended. And yet, the demonic energy that you've taken from me is nowhere to be found. With the amount that you've expended, it should dwarf your own. It should be easier to find than yours. And yet, I can't find hide or hair of it. It's like once you absorb the energy, it ends up somewhere else. If I didn't know any better, I'd say it was a void space." "A void space?" Taleon said. "Well, that's both incredibly concerning, as well as possibly extraordinarily advantageous." "Well, what is it? What's a void space?" "Listen, there's a magical technique in the realm of demons casting. It's a top-tier spell, requiring an absolutely absurd amount of demonic energy to cast. But it essentially creates a black hole, a void that swallows absolutely anything into it, with an astonishing amount of force. There's very little that can be subjected to it and survive. It's what you might call an instant kill. You hit your opponent with it, and then you don't have an opponent anymore. From what I can tell, you at least take the physical objects into your body, turning them into lava. But, by all appearances, the energy simply disappears somewhere. Just like that spell, the black hole. It seems to disappear into some type of void. A void space. That's where the black hole sends everything that it absorbs. In a void space, there's basically nothing. It's sort of like a pocket dimension. A separate world that exists out of creation. Whenever you use black hole, that's where everything that it absorbs gets sent. The thing with a black hole is, once things go in, they don't come back out. It's one way. No one who's ever been absorbed by the attack ever comes back out. And the space inside of a black hole is infinite. There's no limitation to the amount that it can absorb. Apparently, your ability falls into that facet. There appears to not be a limitation. You can absorb as much as you can, as much as your demonic energy will allow you to take. That's the only limitation that there seems to be on it. And the energy gets stored away in some sort of void space, or at least that's my guess. This means no matter how big the attack someone throws at you is, you can just gobble it down with no problem, and no effect on your demonic energy. The big question is, how does that work? How do you pull it back out when you need it? Does the void appear and disappear? It must go to the same place every time, otherwise you wouldn't be able to call the energy back out. Do you have your own specific void space? Simply some kind of endless dimension that you create yourself every time you use that technique, and all of the energy that you absorb just gets piled away inside of it, just waiting for you to call it back out. Honestly, if I had to say something, I'd say that was both terrifying and amazing. Quite frankly, I've never seen a demonic ability like it. It's on an entirely different level. I'd say S-class, without question. The highest tier of demonic ability. Hell, it might even be more powerful than that, entering a category all its own, like the mythical spoken about but never seen Super S-Class. You don't have to worry about a Super S-Class ability. They're stories that people tell. A Super S-Class ability is basically something powerful enough to, well, do in basically anyone. The level of destruction that one could reap if an Super S-Class ability actually existed would be catastrophic. I'm talking about the disappearance of entire cities in a single burst of destruction. Who knows? After seeing that, eventually you might be capable of something on that scale. Right now you're just a kid. Your demonic energy level is nowhere near what it's going to be at its maximum once you're an adult with years of training, experience, and combat under your belt. Your demonic energy level is going to grow by leaps and bounds before then. If it's at the same level as your father's, I could absolutely see you wiping an entire city off of the face of the map with just one of those techniques. I don't want to wipe any cities away, Taleon said, looking rather scared up at Salus as he glared down at him, seeming to talk without really realizing that he's letting his thoughts roll out. No, of course you don't, kid. And if I have anything to say about it, that's definitely not something you're going to do. I hope you don't end up the type of person who would do something like that. I was just ruminating over what could be possible, that's all. Pay no mind to it. Sure, Taleon said, still somewhat frightened. Thinking about gobbling an entire city down, quite frankly, terrified him.